The fields stretched endlessly, golden and swaying under the late summer sun. The scent of warm earth and fresh corn filled the air, mixing with the distant hum of tractors and the soft rustle of the wind. I had worked these fields my entire life, under the same sky, in the same dust, with the same routine. But this season was different. Because of him. He was just another farmhand, a newcomer like so many others, here for the harvest. But from the moment I saw him, his rough hands gripping the stalks, his sweat-soaked shirt clinging to his back, the way his quiet smile made something stir deep inside me, I knew. I knew this harvest wouldn't just change the land. It would change me. Before we dive into this unforgettable love story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring you more passionate and heartfelt stories. Now, let's begin. The sun hung heavy in the sky, beating down on the endless stretch of golden cornfields. The scent of warm earth filled my lungs as I wiped sweat from my brow, the rough fabric of my shirt sticking to my back. This was my life. Wake up before dawn, work until sundown, repeat. I had spent all of my 25 years in this place, knowing nothing but the rhythm of the seasons and the weight of hard labor. I never questioned it, until he arrived. His name was Ethan. 26, broad shoulders, a strong grip, and a quiet way about him that made me curious. He wasn't from here. His accent had a slight drawl, but different from mine. Maybe from another farm, another state. The first time I saw him, he was standing by the barn, sleeves rolled up, hands on his hips, looking out at the fields like he was trying to understand them, like he was looking for something. I don't know why, but I couldn't stop looking at him. And then, just like that, his eyes met mine. It was brief, just a flicker of a second, but it made my pulse stutter. Something about the way he looked at me, steady, calm, made me feel like he could see right through me. I quickly turned away, focusing on my work. I didn't have time for distractions. But as the days passed, Ethan was everywhere. We worked side by side, hauling crates of corn, our hands brushing as we passed sacks of grain between us. We rode in the back of the same truck at the end of a long day, our bodies swaying with every bump in the dirt road, shoulders almost touching. And at night, when the farm quieted and the sky turned a deep, endless blue, I'd catch myself thinking about him, about the way his voice sounded when he spoke, the way his lips curled slightly when he was amused. This was dangerous, not because of him, but because of me. I had never felt this way before. I had never looked at another man and felt this. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I found him by the old fence, leaning against the wooden rails, staring out at the horizon. The air was thick with the scent of harvest, the last rays of light casting a golden glow on his face. I hesitated, then stepped forward. I don't know why. "You like working here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Yeah, it's peaceful." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You're different." I stiffened. "What?" Ethan studied me for a second, then shrugged. "Most of the guys here don't look at me like you do." My throat went dry. My heart pounded. I should have denied it. I should have laughed it off. But instead, I stood there, frozen, feeling completely exposed. The wind rustled through the fields, carrying the scent of earth and corn. And in that quiet moment, as the world around us faded, I knew nothing would ever be the same. The air felt too thick, the space between us too small. Ethan's words echoed in my mind. "Most of the guys here don't look at me like you do." I wanted to deny it, to pretend I didn't understand what he meant. But I did. I understood too well. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. Instead, I just stood there, my hands gripping the wooden fence like it was the only thing keeping me upright. Ethan didn't push. He just watched me, his gaze calm but knowing, like he had already figured something out about me that I hadn't even figured out myself. A soft breeze rustled through the cornfields, golden stalks swaying under the evening sky. The farm was quiet now, except for the occasional sound of a distant truck and the chirping of crickets. I forced myself to look away. I don't know what you mean. Ethan let out a soft breath, almost like a laugh, but not quite. Okay. That's all he said. No accusations, no pressure, just okay. And for some reason, that made it worse. I expected him to leave, but he didn't. He leaned against the fence again, arms crossed, looking back out at the horizon like we hadn't just had the most unsettling conversation of my life. I should have walked away. I should have gone inside, back to my bunk, back to the familiar routine that made sense. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed. For a long time, we just stood there, staring out at the fading sun, saying nothing. And somehow, that silence felt louder than anything else. The next morning, I woke up different. Or maybe I had just finally noticed something that had been there all along. Because now, every time I saw Ethan, when he lifted a heavy crate onto the truck, when he wiped sweat from his neck with the edge of his shirt, when he smiled at something someone said, I felt it, that pull, that strange, quiet longing that I didn't have a name for. And the worst part? I caught him watching me too. It was never obvious, never blatant, just small things, like the way his gaze lingered on me a second too long when we worked side by side. The way his fingers almost brushed mine when we passed tools between us. The way, when he thought I wasn't looking, he would glance at me, quick, uncertain, but there. I told myself I was imagining it, but I wasn't. And then, one night, he proved it. We had finished late, the last of the corn loaded onto the trucks under the dim glow of the barn lights. Most of the other guys had already gone back to their bunks, leaving just the two of us behind. Ethan was leaning against the open barn door, stretching his arms, his shirt riding up just enough to reveal a sliver of tanned skin. I looked away too quickly. He noticed. You always do that, he said, his voice quiet. I tensed. Do what? Ethan took a step closer, just enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the scent of sweat and earth and something else I couldn't describe. Look away, he murmured. My breath hitched. I didn't move. I should have laughed it off, should have changed the subject, should have said anything to break the tension pressing down on me like a weight. But I didn't, because the truth was, I didn't want to. And Ethan? He knew. The barn smelled like fresh hay and warm earth, the distant hum of crickets filling the silence between us. Ethan was too close now. I could feel the heat of him, the weight of his presence pressing into me like something unseen but impossible to ignore. His words still hung in the air. You always look away. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I don't know what you're talking about. Ethan let out a slow, quiet breath. He knew I was lying. The truth was, I had never felt anything like this before. I had never looked at another man and wanted like this. And yet, here I was. I should have walked away, should have let the moment pass like it was nothing. But my feet wouldn't move. I didn't want them to. Ethan's eyes searched mine, deep brown and steady, pulling me in. Just once, he said, his voice softer now. Don't look away. My heart slammed against my ribs. Then, he reached for me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, careful, his fingers brushing against my arm, testing, waiting, giving me the chance to pull away. I didn't. A sharp breath left me as his touch burned through the fabric of my shirt, searing into my skin. It was barely anything, a simple graze of his fingers, but it unraveled something inside me that I hadn't even realized was tangled. I exhaled shakily, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan. His name felt strange on my lips in that moment, heavy with something unspoken. His hand slid lower, just enough for his thumb to trace the inside of my wrist. That was all it took. A shiver ran through me, and I saw the way Ethan's gaze darkened, the way his jaw tightened, the way his breath hitched just like mine. I had spent my whole life ignoring this part of me, telling myself it wasn't there, that I wasn't this. But right now, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. Ethan leaned in slightly, his voice just above a murmur. Tell me to stop. I should have. I didn't. The silence stretched between us, thick and charged. The world outside faded, the cornfields, the bunkhouse, the rules we had lived by our entire lives. None of it mattered anymore. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and erratic. Ethan's fingers curled around mine, a silent question. And when I didn't move away, when I didn't break the moment, he had his answer. Slowly, carefully, he closed the distance between us. His forehead rested lightly against mine, our breaths mixing, my skin burning where he touched me. Everything in me screamed to pull away, to run. But all I could think was, I don't want to. Then, just as his lips almost touched mine, a voice outside, loud, rough. Someone was coming. Ethan and I jerked apart, our chests rising and falling, the space between us suddenly too much and not enough all at once. Footsteps crunched against the dirt, getting closer. Ethan's gaze met mine, something wild and desperate in his eyes. This wasn't over, not even close. The footsteps outside the barn grew louder, crunching against the dirt floor. My heart slammed against my ribs as Ethan and I stepped apart, our breaths still ragged, our bodies still burning from what almost happened. A shadow moved across the entrance. "Y'all still in here?" It was Tom, one of the older farmhands. His voice carried the easy tone of someone who had no idea what he had just interrupted. Ethan turned first, his expression already schooled into something unreadable. "Yeah," he called back, his voice steady. "Just finishing up." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move, to act normal, when nothing about this felt normal anymore. Not after that. Tom nodded, stepping inside. "Boss is looking for you both. Said to wrap up and get some rest." His gaze flicked between us, but he didn't seem suspicious, just tired. Ethan gave him a small nod. "We'll be right behind you." Tom lingered for a second, then shrugged and walked off, leaving us alone again. But now with too much distance between us. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I should have said something. Anything. But the words were stuck in my throat. Ethan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "We should go." I nodded, my pulse still racing. "Yeah," but neither of us moved. Finally, he looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw it, the same storm that was raging inside me. And I knew. This wasn't over. That night, I couldn't sleep. The bunkhouse was quiet, the only sounds the slow, steady breathing of the other farmhands around me. The mattress was stiff beneath my back, but it wasn't the discomfort keeping me awake. It was him, the way he had touched me, the way I had let him. I had spent my whole life pushing down feelings I didn't understand, telling myself they weren't real, that they didn't matter. But Ethan had torn through every wall I had built like they were nothing. And the worst part? I didn't want to rebuild them. I turned over, exhaling slowly, and then I heard it. A quiet shuffle, a creak in the old wooden floor. I turned my head just in time to see a shadow slip out the door. Ethan. For a second, I hesitated. I could let him go. Pretend none of this had happened. Pretend my heart wasn't beating so hard it hurt. But then, before I could talk myself out of it, I followed him. Outside, the night was warm, the scent of corn and damp earth heavy in the air. Ethan stood a few yards away, near the fence line, his back to me, his hands braced on the wooden rails. His shoulders were tense, his head bowed like he was fighting something. I stepped forward, gravel crunching beneath my boots. He didn't turn, but I knew he heard me. I swallowed hard. "Ethan." He let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "I shouldn't have touched you." I froze. "Why?" "Because..." He finally turned to face me, and I saw everything he wasn't saying in his eyes. "Because now I can't stop thinking about it." The air between us tightened. I took another step closer. "So don't stop." Ethan's breath hitched. His fingers curled around the wooden fence, like he needed something solid to hold on to. "You don't understand," he murmured. I swallowed. "Then make me." His eyes searched mine, and for a long, agonizing moment, neither of us moved. Then, like something inside him finally snapped, he closed the distance between us, his hand gripping the back of my neck, pulling me in. And this time, nothing stopped us. His lips crashed into mine, desperate, hungry, like he had been waiting for this as long as I had. The moment shattered me. Everything I had ignored, everything I had denied, it was all here now. Real and burning and impossible to escape. Ethan pressed me against the fence, his hands gripping my waist like he was afraid I'd disappear. His breath was hot against my skin, his body solid against mine. And I let him. For the first time in my life, I didn't look away. I didn't run. Because this was real, and I was finally ready to feel it. Ethan's lips were still on mine, hot, desperate, and real. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me closer, and for the first time in my life, I let myself fall. The fence pressed into my back, the night air warm around us, the distant rustle of cornfields the only sound apart from our heavy breaths. This shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have made sense. But it did. I had spent years avoiding feelings I didn't understand, years pretending they weren't there. But now, Ethan was here, his fingers tangled in my hair, his lips moving against mine like he had been starving for this, too. I didn't know who pulled away first. All I knew was that when we did, the world felt different. Ethan rested his forehead against mine, both of us breathing hard, neither of us ready to break the moment. "This is crazy," he murmured. I let out a breathless chuckle. "Yeah." His fingers skimmed my jaw like he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "You okay?" I swallowed hard, looking up at him. "I think I've never been better." He let out a slow, shaky breath, like he had been waiting for those words. The silence stretched between us, thick with something uncharted, something fragile. I should have been afraid of what came next, but I wasn't. Because for the first time, I wanted to know. The next few days passed like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. We still worked side by side, still woke up before dawn, still spent our days covered in sweat and dirt, hauling crates and driving trucks. But everything had changed. Every glance held something deeper. Every accidental touch lingered a second too long. Every stolen moment behind the barn or near the fence or by the old tractor was filled with a quiet fire we couldn't name. And then, one evening, as we sat by the lake after a long day, Ethan finally spoke the words I hadn't let myself say. "This is real, isn't it?" I turned to him, watching the way the fading sunlight painted his skin golden. I nodded. "Yeah, it is." He looked at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then he exhaled, like he had been holding his breath forever. "I don't want to lose this." My chest ached at the honesty in his voice. "You won't." The words were a promise, because I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. And neither was he. Ethan reached for my hand, lacing our fingers together. The farm, the seasons, the rest of the world. None of it mattered anymore, because this was ours, and I wasn't letting it go. The last days of the harvest came faster than I expected. The cornfields, once full and golden, were nearly bare now, the land settling into the quiet that came before the next season. I should have been thinking about what came next, about where life would take us after the work was done. But all I could think about was him, Ethan. His laughter in the early mornings, the way his hands brushed against mine when we loaded crates into the truck, the stolen kisses behind the barn when no one was looking. For the first time, I had something worth holding on to, and for the first time, I was terrified of losing it. One evening, after work, we sat by the fence, watching the sunset. The sky burned in shades of orange and pink, the fields stretching endlessly before us. Ethan sighed, rubbing his palms together. "The season's almost over." I nodded, my stomach tightening. I knew what he was thinking. Farmhands came and went. That was the way of things. When the work ended, so did everything else. But I wasn't ready for this to end. I turned to him, gathering every ounce of courage I had. "What if we don't leave?" Ethan's head snapped toward me, his brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" I swallowed hard. I had never said anything like this before, never let myself think this far ahead. "I mean, we don't have to leave the farm. We could stay. Find work here. I hesitated, my heart pounding. "A way to make this work." Ethan stared at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. My chest tightened. Maybe I had said too much. Maybe I was the only one who felt this way. But then, slowly, he smiled. A small, quiet, knowing smile. The kind that said he had been thinking the same thing all along. "You serious?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I am." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Damn." He let out a soft chuckle. "You really got me, don't you?" I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "Guess so." And then, without another word, he kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was home. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against mine, and I felt the weight of everything we had been through settle around us. "I'm staying," he murmured. A breath I didn't know I was holding escaped my lips. "Yeah? Yeah." He squeezed my hand. "With you." The farm, the fields, the endless sky, it had all been a backdrop to something I never expected to find, something real, something worth staying for. And as we sat there, fingers laced together, I knew this wasn't just a harvest, it was the beginning of forever. Did you love this ending? Would you have stayed too? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget, subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications for more unforgettable love stories.